Want to write fiction that sticks? In this episode, we explore how to choose powerful topics, weave in research, find your voice, and tell true stories with emotional impact and ethical care. Whether it's memoir or manifesto, learn how to craft nonfiction that informs, inspires, and keeps readers turning the page. And I have guests.
This is where we pretend like the theme song is playing.
I need a quick track. I'll dance.
I forgot how I went.
All right. Hey there, aspiring horror authors. It's another episode of Sako and the Moon by two self-published horror authors walking the path of horror craft and marketing. I myself am dark artist and designer Sako Toomey, but I also write horror under the name Cass Voight. I do a bunch of other things, but we'll just mention that I'm published 4 times over, 3 standalones and an anthology. And I'm working on a couple of books and a serial. In fact, one of those books I just finished the 0 draft on.
Like Frosted Flakes.
I've been working on my craft for decades, and now I'd like to share my skills with you guys.
And I don't have that much for an intro, but I am Dwayne Allhearn, more affectionately known as the Moon, and I write stuff, I film stuff, and I talk to people. And one of the people that I want to talk to with Sako is this guy down here. This is a good friend of ours. He is the author of Screaming for Pleasure. He is S.A. Bradley. What's happening, homie?
Hey, so good to have me here. It's so great to be here. Thanks so much for having me here. It's good to see you guys again. I mean, sometimes this is the only way I get to see anybody these days is to actually get on these things. Yeah, and I'm having a lot of fun just continuing this crazy journey of whatever the heck it is that I'm trying to do. All sorts of different media and writing, and continuing to go in fiction and nonfiction.
Well, you do a lot of traveling, don't you? I mean, it's hard for us to find you in one spot. Every time I turn around, you're in an airport going somewhere, doing something, seeing a bunch of people. You've had AuthorCon not too long ago. I'm sure you had some other events. What do you do on the regular? What is S.A. Bradley doing? Where's it going?
Oh my goodness! Well, traveling, I do get asked to be at conventions a lot, horror themed for the most part. I just got back from Phoenix Fan Fusion in Phoenix, Arizona, and that's more of a large con, right? So they have science fiction, fantasy, comic books, and horror is like this little side thing. But because of people like myself and authors Brian Hawes and James Sabata and a few others, we've created this image down there, and it's gotten a lot of speed. So they've created a horror circuit at this point at Phoenix, and we do a lot of panels. We do some book readings, we do some book signings, but we have a lot of fun ideas that are there. Because we all know each other, we essentially get on each other's panels and we bring in some guests. We bring in authors that we've always wanted to talk to so that they can come and get 3 hots and a cot and talk about their stuff. And we have a lot of fun with that. This time around, we had a couple that really we had people packed to the rafters. And one of them was one that I did called Say You Love Satan. And it was essentially taking the idea of 1665, 1985, and 2025 and having people try to figure out which satanic panic was happening at what time. And so essentially we spent an hour talking about how it might seem new, but every one of the arguments that you're hearing, every one of the fears that you're hearing, any of the concerns have been around for centuries now. And it's just different people saying it, and the fact that we have great forgetters between our ears that allow this kind of stuff to continue to happen. And so that went over really well. And I'm going to be at Colorado Festival of Horror in September. That's a nice medium-sized horror convention. It's been around, I think this is its 5th year. It's the little engine that could. I really enjoy it. And they've asked me back, and I might do a lecture there on horror, monsters as metaphors, which is where I talk about how horror has always, from the very beginning, been commenting on what's happening in the culture. It's easy to not think it's woke when it's 400 years old, but the reality was it was woke then, and it's woke now. And so go fuck yourself if you don't like it. And so that's essentially the kind of thing that we're going to be doing there, as well as the normal stuff of talking about the joy of bloodletting and just how horror, in my estimation, allows us to deal with the shadow self and have a nice slow dance and an understanding that we can have these dark sides inside of us, and that actually talking to them and talking about them and exploring them without becoming them is healthy. It's a lot better than ignoring the problem, which is essentially what the plot of every horror movie is. People ignoring the problem, suddenly becoming the problem.
Mm-hmm. Well put.
You did mention, because I know Sako's going to have a whole bunch of stuff, but I want to add this to kind of segue into the topic. You mentioned things like monsters as metaphors to like real life situations and social reflection. You've mentioned things like bloodletting, which were actual science at some point, to put leeches on to suck out the germs and whatnot. And you mentioned these connections to real life, and that's what we're basically talking about here today is nonfiction. What is the importance, the significance of documenting these true things metaphorically, or in some cases not necessarily metaphorically, like to draw in nonfiction? What's the importance of having horror nonfiction?
I think the importance of horror nonfiction is to legitimize horror for the first and foremost. Is that horror is still, even after Academy Awards and all of that stuff, it's still considered genre. And genre is a coded, dirty word for people who just love drama and they love theater. They've been using that since theater was no longer the main winner. Once movies came in, there's been this constant degradation of anything that is not on a theater stage. And horror has so much benefit to it. It's probably it's the second oldest story ever told, is what I like to say. And it legitimizes it by bringing it into nonfiction, saying this isn't just some whimsy of like, oh, I just like the oogie stuff or whatever people like to think of. They like to denigrate it to a childish level or to a lowest common denominator. And the reality is that horror allows, through metaphor and allegory, an ability to talk about things that we can't quite articulate or grasp. We may not even know that we are working in nonfiction at certain points, bringing nonfiction into our fiction even, until years later, because we're so in the weeds. As artists, as writers, we're living in this world. So it's kind of like at a microbiological level. There's atoms of me meeting and switching with atoms of you as we're talking, because we're not quite totally solid. And it's the same with genre, and it's the same with how we feel about art when we're expressing it in the world. We are not separate from this world. We're not just walking this earth. We're part of this earth. And so because of that, we can't help but have the things that are happening in the day, the worries and the concerns that are happening that are real and legitimate from showing up in our work. It's a byproduct of actually existing. And to me, it's important that we realize that talking about these things is how stuff gets worked on. Ignoring the problem doesn't do it. So for me, I think if I'm doing fiction and I bring in nonfiction and make it a metaphor, I'm taking something that has happened in real life, giving people a mooring to understand what the story may be about, and allows me to comment about that without getting into a lot of trouble. It's an old idea. Shakespeare did it. Shakespeare gave us all of the genres, right? He gave us love stories. He gave us horror movies. He gave us action. He gave us comedies. He gave us tragedies. He gave us sex farce. But they're all considered drama. But the thing is, what he was doing was he was commenting on the king. But if you commented about the king at that time, you get your head cut off. So instead of getting his head cut off, he'd make it the Scottish play. Well, it's not England, it's Scotland. That's a whole different thing, right? We're going to talk about Rome, but the thing is, he's not really concerned about Rome. He's not thinking about Caesar. He's thinking about the monarchy is what he's thinking about, and he's commenting on it. So we get to safely talk about things that bother us. And I think comedy and horror are so important, as well as science fiction. I don't want to give short shrift to science fiction. They're very important because they talk about things that make us anxious. They talk about the thing that's not polite. They talk about the thing that we're not supposed to bring up. And so by bringing it up and doing it in a way of flair, allows us to defuse the bomb. Like, I don't want to, I say this a lot, I don't want to watch a movie about the January 6th insurrection, right? But I'd love to watch a movie where werewolves take over Congress. You're going to have a certain sensation in here. You're going to remember why the building of Congress. It's like when everybody was so upset during the Clinton administration and they had Independence Day show blowing up the White House on the poster, right? Everybody knew what that fucking thing was. Mm-hmm. It hit everybody, galvanized things. Why do these images matter? Because deep down we have some kind of unconscious thing that we're trying to hide that is in the air. And horror allows us to do that. And I think when you're just doing straight up nonfiction of horror, you're essentially looking at that straightforward. If I'm looking at why horror, nonfiction horror matters, is that I'm trying to legitimize it. I'm trying to let you know that there's something about horror that affects you directly, even if you don't like horror stories. You may be living in a horror show and not know it. But bringing up things that, if I'm going to do nonfiction, I have to back that up, right? So if I'm backing up what I'm saying about horror being good for you, or horror commenting on the culture, I have to give examples. So I'll go to something like Godzilla. If I want to talk about Godzilla, there's a world war that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then I'm going to look at two different ways of looking at that war and that bomb being dropped. There's the American way, where what we decided to do is make movies about giant ants that are coming up out of the sewers and taking over LA. That doesn't have anything to do about the communist threat. They're in our system. They're coming down. They're taking over the cities. Yeah, so there's a guilt, but there's a shift of blame. Instead of it being about we did something bad, it's like, who's going to do it to us now? What have we wrought, right? Then there's Godzilla. And Godzilla is like, we fucked up. This is what our past wrought us. You know, the thing about Godzilla is he doesn't attack New York. He doesn't attack LA. He attacks Tokyo, right? Why does Godzilla attack Tokyo? So there is this idea of ownership of, you woke this demon, right? This god that was underground. It's nuclear. All this
sleeping dragon.
Yeah, sleeping dragon. So you have all of that stuff. That I have to do my homework to talk about that. And if I'm going to be bold enough to say that, you know, horror matters in everyday life, just like comedy matters in everyday life, I have to look at why I think that's real. You know, there's nothing more political than saying movies just happen for no good reason. Higgledy-piggledy, they're just here to entertain. Sure, they're here to entertain, but that doesn't mean that they're pointless. That doesn't mean that there's not a reason that certain things are happening in each and every fucking movie that you watch. Why one generation is all about, you know, the terrorists are German, and then they're Russian, and then they're Iranian, and that's every different decade. Why do they change? Well, just because? No.
Yeah.
Yes, Animal Farm is just a movie about pigs.
That's right. So now you remember the last time we were on, you never spoke, and I just kept rambling. So I'll just see what I can do about shutting my ass up.
Okay. So brief overview of what we are going through today. We are going to go into choosing a topic. We're going to go into researching and structure. We're going to go into voice and ethics. And then we're going to keep it engaging.
Yeah, because those are engaging topics. Every author loves dealing with all of those things. Research, yum, yum, yum. Yeah.
Yum.
Ethics, oh my goodness, yum. Nothing like talking about that. Okay, that sounds great. You lead, I'll follow.
Okay. So what makes nonfiction so compelling? Right.
I'm not sure. I mean, you're either into nonfiction or you're not. There are people that are like, I'd never read nonfiction no matter what. It's a smaller audience that likes nonfiction. But it all comes down to what you mentioned first, provocative topic. You can have, a lot of nonfiction isn't about fiction or society, a ton of it is like how to be good at real estate, how to beat taxes. Those are not compelling to most people, but they're really compelling if you're interested in those subjects. And those are the big sellers, right? The big sellers are the ones that have something that you can get from it. And so you have to try and come up with something, in your nonfiction that compels somebody to pick it up. It's a topic of interest, even if it's argumentative. Like, I'll be the judge of that, motherfucker. That is completely fine. And they need to get something out of it, whatever that pink spoon is, the sampler.
Yeah. Personal relevance is also a factor, and unexplored angles.
Yes.
Also a factor. Types of nonfiction. There's the memoir. There's the essay. There's the how-to, journalism, creative nonfiction.
I kind of roll around. All my books are kind of like I have a pile of all of those genre styles that you talk about, and I fell and I just picked up all the papers, and it's like, here's my homework. And so so many of those styles are connected. My work tends to be to compel the reader to keep coming in. There's a certain biographical memoir area to it, but it's not deeply super personal for the most part. Like, I'm writing a new book called Defenders of the Faith, How Horror is Going to Save the World One Fan at a Time. And I'm on the last chapter.
Yes,
and
it will.
The last chapter is kicking my ass. But in there, it's such a weirdly strange, broad and bold topic, but I'm talking about how fandom can make you a better person. And that horror fandom has this ability to take in the outsiders, and it allows the outsider to express themselves. And the kind of thing that excites me about the group of people that is normally denigrated, right? The people who are allegedly antisocial and all this, how we truly are social and how we find our tribe, if we want to call it that, our clan. If I'm doing that kind of thing, I kind of start it with some biographical. Every one of my chapters starts with something that people can understand. Like, I'm talking about sacred places on one chapter. So what's a sacred place? I talk about how there are places that we go to gather, and they don't necessarily make sense, right? I don't think you can build one. So the story that I tell that's personal, that I think is somewhat universal, is when I was a kid, we used to hang out. The teenagers all got together at the Burger King parking lot behind the big dumpsters. That was a place of privacy. It's not known for its odor. It's not known for being nice. We were there, rain, snow, whatever. And we'd show up every Friday night. That was the place for the people who wanted to get together. That's where all the people in the know were. Now, at the same point, the police and the parents did not like that idea. They didn't like teenagers congregating anywhere. That was a sign of trouble. There were two things that we did. We went behind that dumpster and we cruised the boulevard in our cars. And they started ticketing if you went 3 times around this circle. So they're trying to keep this organization from happening. So they built a center, a community center. So basketball, all this stuff. You can learn about plants. You can do all this stuff. And for the first month, people went there. And then after that, crickets. Kids aren't there. Where are they? They're at the dumpster behind the Burger King. You can't force a sacred place down somebody's. It's something sincere. It's something that speaks directly to you. So I think that a lot of people had whatever that might be. Well, it might not have been a dumpster behind Burger King, but there was a place that everybody congregated that nobody else understood. And I use that to talk about why we go to conventions and how it doesn't necessarily mean the convention is good or convenient. It gives us something unexplainable. It's an intangible that has to do with connection of the people. I have another one that's about the fine art of bullshitting. That bullshitting itself is how art happens. Not sitting around in a master class, not sitting around. We have a responsibility. We're going to write for 10 minutes and then we'll talk. And then we're back for an hour. Let's go. That's great for a certain level of responsibility. For the inspiration to actually write, it's getting together with people and talking about anything except writing. And then all of a sudden the ideas come. If you take a look at it, you look at the Algonquin Round Table in New York City. You've got these people who got together and all they did was get drunk and sit there and laugh at the people who are coming in, and you get 5 great novels out of that group of people. Same thing happened in Paris. You have these expatriates after World War II all showing up, and we end up getting masterpieces out of that. They didn't start by talking to Picasso about drawing and stuff like that. They ended up sitting around having conversation. When we loosen up and we get this contact, we start to riff like musicians. And when we riff like musicians, ideas start coming. We have a mutual friend, James Sabata. We sit and we bullshit. We try to make each other laugh. And the next thing you know, I somehow helped him in this moment that he was working on in his book that I didn't even know existed. And he's like, holy shit, that's a great idea. Keep talking about that. And the next thing you know, it made it into his book. And it helped him go over one of the 1,000 hurdles that he had to do to be able to get his book or his screenplay done. And that is how I find it. We were at one point talking about some short story we were all supposed to write for a compilation. And he asked me if I thought of an idea. And I'm like, I don't know, I have this idea called Green. And it's this little girl goes to a Halloween party and paints herself green like a Martian. And she has the googly eyes coming off on the springs. And then she just doesn't want to take the costume off. And she keeps thinking she's actually an astronaut or an actual alien. And we laughed about it, like the absurdity of someone pretending to be an alien, that it has these manufactured eyes and everything. And it turned into this thing about phobias. And it turned into this thing about MAGA. How do we come to believe? What is the change that happens? And is it actually a real change? There was this thing called the dancing epidemic in Salisbury, Germany, I believe.
Yes.
A long time ago, and it was a little girl danced herself to death, but other kids started to dance themselves to death. No matter what, they couldn't stop this from happening. And then it started happening to adults, and then it started, and then it just stopped. And I said, what if that is kind of what's happening in the culture right now? What if there's just this mania that is just hitting this certain thing, and it's not even conscious anymore? It's a behavioral genetic thing, like a gene just opened up. All that happened because of a joke about a guy who pretends that he's a Martian. And they're like, sir, I see the springs. That's made in China right there. And the guy refusing to believe, like it's a comedy routine. And it became this idea for a story that every time I tell it to somebody, they're like, I need to read that. That sounds fucked up. And so the serendipity is way more important to the creative process than we like to think. The idea of us relaxing and having fun with each other. So I bring up little things like that before I go into a chapter about how our conversations, we need more conversation one-on-one with each other or a group of people to be creative, and that putting ourselves in these small boxes only allow us to be so creative. Movies can only be so creative if they're a one-person job. And not to denigrate CGI too much, but if you can have one person make everything happen in your movie, it's all going to look the same. And whereas if you're doing something that is done live in front of the camera, you've got a whole bunch of technicians that are working together to make that thing happen, and every one of them brings something to that look. And that particular look at that time may feel more real than real at certain points. So that's what I do. So there is a part of the thing which is going to be essay. It's an essay. Each one of these chapters feels like an essay in some ways. They all have a through line, but there's also a personal experience of a memoir in there. And then I have to, what am I talking about? Well, I have to come up with historical reasons of why I say that. When I say that it's better than the masterminds, I could see the skeptical eyebrows furl up. And it's like, yeah, okay, I get that. We invest a lot of time in that. But the idea of, first off, why do you pick who to have a mastermind with? It's something to have fucking fun with, right? So something has to entertain you first before you decide to go to school. And so I think that we need to look at the things that we have in common and the things that make creativity fun and explosive and sometimes transgressive.
Just to piggyback off that before the next question comes down, there was a time at a convention, you and I, Scott, has sat down outside, completely BSing on a bench, and the next thing you know, you and I are just kind of riffing back and forth about a security guard and the crazy short story that I have not written that, but I have not forgotten the idea. But there's a lot of truth to that. We all met at a particular convention, Imaginarium, which happens to be next week, and between room parties and the couch is something that we always end up talking about. The couch is the best example of what you've just said. So there's a bunch of panels that take place at this convention, a lot of seminars and presentations and workshops. But in the lobby of this hotel is a couch. It's not part of the convention. It's just literally part of the hotel. And it's a place where people just gather. Horror writers, romance writers, filmmakers, musicians. We just sit there. And then while we're sitting there, we introduce ourselves because we're in such close proximity. And then we share what we do. And the next thing you know, hey, I'm working on a film. Well, I need you do music, right? Do you ever work on soundtracks? So yeah, baby. And the next thing you know, we're sharing ideas, we're collaborating, and all of this happens. Sure, we can discuss all this in a 1 hour presentation about this, that, or the third, but so much more is going to come out of the couch. And we talk, so many people, we joke about the couch, more of a, that's our sacred space in a sense. That's our behind the dumpster. It's this couch. And to the point where I might not even, don't tell Holly and Steven I said this. I mean, not like it's just between the three of us. I might not even do panels next year. Part of me wants to just show up next year and just sit on the couch because so much happens in, to take your term, in this sacred space that the couch has become. You're going to meet so much more people and get so much more work done from the couch. Yeah. It's amazing how collaborative the unofficial parts of gatherings can be.
Yeah. After hours, the masks come off, right? Everybody's pretty much at the same level when you're all hanging down, and you're not worried about time left over in your panels, or is there going to be enough people there? Can I actually use this word without getting yelled at? You don't worry about that stuff at that point at the couch. And I think that happens at many of my conventions, and my friends who are in conventions that don't necessarily want to go to them anymore. It's always about, well, I might go there and I'll just tour the city and I'll come in after hours. I mean, when I first got to some of my favorite conventions, I did all the panels. They would show movies 24/7. I'd go watch the movies just out of solidarity for the poor projectionist who's there. And I would do all of this. It was fun. I'd go see Rocky Horror and stuff like that. But the truth of the matter is, less and less and less of that was I watching. It was much more interesting to hang out with people. And especially you go to the vendors room. And I talk about that. The vendors are like the Grateful Dead guys that are holding the I Need a Miracle sign. They follow these conventions around. They go from city to city with their wares, and they sell just enough to get to the next one, right? And all of them are creators. And that's another thing that I bring up in the book, is that the people that I tend to really connect with, and this book's all about how horror is the punk rock of cinema and the punk rock of literature, that it has this whole DIY thing. Whoever is the audience today might be the performer tomorrow, and vice versa. There's no velvet rope. You don't have to be absolute pro to do it. It's the intention that matters sometimes more. The emotion's more important than the intelligence at certain points, but the intelligence will always show up. And all of that stuff makes it more like a punk rock thing. But the reality is, a lot of people that I know, the things that we go to these for is just hanging out. And the more we talk with each other, the more creative that we get to do the next thing. The vendors are all those kind of people. Most vendors, if you ask them, what are you working on? Well, I'm doing the art for 5 more of these T-shirts, or I'm in the middle of a book, or I'm actually a short filmmaker and I'm paying for the stuff by selling this stuff. So the people that I most gravitate to are people who are compelled to give back in some way, whatever that is. They don't just consume. They're not just consumers. They're not collectors. Collectors are a whole different thing. In a way, we're collectors, but we collect to give away. It's no fun to watch a horror movie and not give it as a recommendation to someone else, not to give your opinion about it, not to share the movies that you absolutely love, not to give a book list to people. That's sharing. Collectors don't do that. Collectors sit with their stuff. And I look for the people who want to give it away. They get it to give it away. And that's what art is. That's what we're doing. You know, we create stuff to give it away.
Profoundly put.
I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm on 3
Let's get into the research chunk, right? Trustworthiness is the backbone.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. How do you organize your research?
Oh, God. Well, first I need to know what I need to research, right? First comes the idea, whatever it is, and whatever. Case in point, the next book that I'm going to work on that's nonfiction, I'm working on some fiction stuff, but the next nonfiction book, I'm going to see if I can get funding for this, is going to across the country to talk to people who do haunts, people who do the haunts for Halloween. And that's become a multi-billion-dollar business. And there's actually a convention that you have to be invited to. That is the Haunters Convention. I want to see if I can talk to people to get invited. It's the state-of-the-art stuff. So it goes from your backyard haunts, like what I do, to Universal Studios Screamathon, stuff like that. So you can go to this convention. There'll be the state-of-the-art spooky stuff, like animatronics that glide in the air, cameras that do all this stuff, down to, I have different versions of fake blood. So I talked about how I wanted to do something like that. And everybody that I told that idea to would stop and say, you got to do that. I would love to read that. That's quirky as shit. That's something that that's a whole subculture that I don't know anything about. And the idea that you would talk to people who make an entire living on working on scaring things, and then the people who don't make a living at all and spend their own money to do this stuff every year for one 24-hour period, that's something cool. So that it starts with an idea like that, and then it's like, well, fuck, now what do I do? What am I going to talk about? How am I going to take that idea and run with it? So like the book that I have now, it's as dreary as it sounds. It's an outline. What am I going to talk about? What are the things? Do I have a book? How am I going to find out if I got a book? Well, let's make an outline, see what's there, and get as close as I can. And knowing that it is a living, breathing, organic thing that's going to change as time goes on. The book that I started with is not the book that I'm ending with. The first book that I came up with is more of an arrogant thing. It was like, let me tell you what I think makes a good horror movie. And it's like, who the fuck are you? And that was what I thought. It was such a great idea. And, I had a guy who wanted to help me get it published and stuff. They're like, this is great. You have all this knowledge. You should get that out there. So he patted me on the back and all that. And then I go talk to my horror fans, like hardcore horror fans, my friends. And I tell them the idea and they'd be like blank faced. And I go, oh, this is not exciting anybody. So it changed. It ended up going, what do I really want to talk about? Do I want to talk about how I'm so great at knowing all this stuff? No, that's not fucking interesting. What's interesting, on the other hand, is all these people that are so great. What makes all these people want to do this? Why are we so into something that doesn't make any sense? If you're looking at it from the outside, fandom in and of itself, even sports, whatever, might be more socially acceptable. We still know it's somewhat senseless. It's a feel thing more than it is a think thing. And so I was like, how do I talk about this? Well, I'm an arguer. So my outlines are debates. My outlines are, this is why I think this is important. Fuck you, this is why I think it's important. Whatever the first chapter is, I put down a brief thing. And then it's like, how do I prove that? Somebody's just going to go, bullshit. And that's a good debater. Bullshit. And then it's all of a sudden, well, how do I make that none of this is a lie? My thing about integrity and stuff is that I am writing a signed affidavit of how stupid I am every time I make a book. That is a nonfiction book. It is how bad my research is. If somebody wants to take me apart, I have written it down how bad my research is and how much I lied. And it's there forever, and they can put it in my face. So instead, as a good debater, as a good arguer, I don't want to give them the satisfaction. So I need to make sure I know what I'm talking about. I don't want it to become a problem a decade later. I may not be able to change things that I wrote, that at that time or what I believed or I was misinformed about, but I need to at least be able to talk about that. I need to at least be able to know that what I'm putting down makes sense, especially if I'm coming at it from, as you mentioned before, you want to come up with a new angle, right? Movies are good, fans are nice. What the hell is that? So you need to come up with a reason that that's an interesting thing. And it usually comes from a bold statement. Horror is going to change the world one fan at a time. The thing that you think isn't going to help everybody is going to be the thing that's going to help everybody when everything sucks. And okay, explain yourself, dummy. Okay, great. Do you have 235 pages worth of time? Yes. Okay, great. Let's talk about this. And so the idea is that I research based on my outline. I put the outline together. I come up with as many different variations. I argue with myself. I debate with myself. I debate with people. I sit there and I say, "What if I was to say this to you? What would you say?" And that becomes a chapter. How do I argue the point that they just said? How do I defend my thesis against the criticisms that's there? We are all peer reviewed. We are all the artists that are in nonfiction. We're like scientists. Our papers have to go through peer review, and if we don't make it through peer review, we're going to be a laughing stock, or we're going to be ignored. Because don't stub your toe in fandom. Don't make broad statements that are going to upset fandom. They're the only people who are going to buy your book, quite honestly. So research comes out of that. My problem is I really dig into research and I over-research, just like a lot of people do. My wife laughs at me. I'll be sitting there like I do this for my podcast, right? I do the same thing. I do all this research for a hour to hour and a half lecture that I'm giving, and my wife laughs because she's like, "You just did all this research on this thing. I guarantee that's not even going to be in your podcast." I'm like, "You're right, it's not." But the emotion behind that is.
But it could be.
Yeah, it could be.
But it could be.
Yeah,
it could be. Because I do the same thing.
Yeah,
like I'll look up all kinds of stuff for my other shows, and I'm like, I might not put that in there after all. It might be a page and a half that I wrote down, but I don't need that right now.
Yeah.
But I know
what are you going to edit away?
I can use it later. Yeah.
If you start with bare essentials, what are you going to edit, right? So the idea of putting all of that in there, and you never know, it might just be one phrase, or it might be that you learn something. That's what I've found, is that I come in with a preposterous idea that I know what I'm talking about. And then I start doing research. I'm like, whoa, I found so many better arguments for my statements by doing research than the one that I was trying to research in the first place. I find books that are written already on this. I find journals that are written on subjects. I learned so much about World War II just by talking about German Expressionism and where German Expressionism came from, right? And these are things that I kind of knew, we kind of glazed over. But if you're just going off of the high school education that you got and maybe some college, chances are you have a very generalized view of what happened in Europe. You have a very generalized view of what even happened here. And the more that we're going on in history, and we're dethroning the people who owned all of the information, we're finding out all sorts of histories that are shameful in some ways that we have to now reconcile instead of hide. And all of that comes out of research, right? You're just looking down and all of a sudden this thing just doesn't look right in this thing. You pick at it and it's like, whoa, there's something new. So research makes me confident, and I'm then a confident writer about nonfiction, because I don't feel that I'm pantsing it on this. I don't think you can pants nonfiction.
I don't think you can pants nonfiction.
No, that
Speaking of which,
against the rules.
Speaking of which, how would you avoid common pitfalls like overloading with facts, like cherry picking data?
Mm-hmm.
Like how? Yeah, like.
Boy, that's a rough one right there. I don't.
How do you decide what goes in and what stays out?
If I read it and it feels wrong, that's when it makes sense to me. If I read it after putting it down for a little bit and I get a cold sweat of lawsuits on my neck, then that's when I know. But the truth of the matter is, I have readers. I need to have someone else tell me. I can't. I put that down because I truly believe it, right? I may cherry pick because I'm trying to make a thesis here. I become a lawyer, not a historian. And I mean, the thing is, it depends on the kind of book that you're writing, right? If I fudge something, people will go, that guy's an asshole because he said that about Frankenstein. End of the world's not going to happen. On the other hand, if I fuck around on nations' policies and I say something inflammatory about Iran, and people a decade later latch on to that and make that their fascist regime, man, that's a problem. And that does happen. People don't get some of this stuff taken care of. But what I do is I have content editors. Content editors save my ass. And if anybody is out there and they're doing their own stuff, I would strongly suggest to anyone, highly recommend. You don't have to get other things, but I would say a content and a copy editor. The editing is so damn important, and especially a content editor, because the content editor will go in every chapter and go, why is this even here? Why are you saying this? I had stuff in my first book that I thought was absolutely important, and I had an entire chapter about phobias, and I had this fun idea of just, I'm going to write a chapter about, if you have this phobia, watch these movies. Hair of the Dog That Bit You, right? Sure. And just a fun little piece. And she wrote back, my copy editor, or my content editor, and said, oh, so you want to get sued, right? All of a sudden you're giving medical advice. And I'm like, what? I said, no one's going to take this seriously. It's in this book. She goes, how do you know no one's going to take this seriously? What are you doing to undermine psychiatry? What are you doing to undermine this? And I'm like, oh, shit. And I'm like, well, I like this chapter. She's like, fine, let's come up with a difference. So in the very beginning of that chapter, I say, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not this. I'm not that. I'm not telling you to get off your meds. I'm not telling you that watching a Friday the 13th marathon is the same as taking your Percocet. Nothing like that. I said, but if I was, this is the kind of thing, so I made a farcical joke. I also made a disclaimer that didn't taste like a disclaimer. That said, okay, I can now freely talk about this stuff. But it's very easy. I mean, one of the things that happened was I wrote my book and I brought in women, I brought in race, I brought in all of this stuff, politics. I didn't talk about gender at all. So I didn't talk about sexuality. And one of my friends who was a writer said, I was really shocked that, given your background, that you didn't talk about queer art at all. And I was like, son of a bitch, do I have to put out another version of this? How did I miss this very vital vein? And right in my face, I'm in San Francisco. I know this stuff. And I didn't talk about it at all. By omission, I had a bunch of people who liked my work that I did not bring into the campfire. And so, you can make mistakes like that. I look at some of the things that I wrote about women in horror that I think are outdated at this point. I think it's advanced past what I had in 2018. Many of the things that were being held up as like torches are now saying, let's, like a Women in Horror Film Festival down in Marietta, Georgia. They're now called the Renegade Film Festival because they felt that it had moved past the need to call it a Women in Horror Film Festival. Let's just be inclusive, but also support that we make this mostly about women. There were other things that were about supporting women filmmakers, and the only people who could put in were women. Ethereal Film Night was one of them, but they didn't put the name in there. And so the idea of taking the name out is a change from what it was in 2018, or prior to that, 2016, where it was like, we're not getting any representation. So putting that up there is important. So, there are things that you can put in there that may date, and there may be omissions that happen, but you really have to look that you're not saying anything like totally dangerous, right? And luckily with entertainment, me writing about entertainment, the chance of doing dangerous stuff is a lot less possible than if I was talking about economies, or if I was talking about wars, or if I was talking about race relations, and putting in a bunch of facts that were only facts for the people that I hung out with, but not for the rest of the world that I'm actually talking about. There is dangerous work that's out there. There are people who do nonfiction that is dangerous, that is without moral flagpoles. They're not making their foundation an immoral stance.
I think ethics, basically, and emotional impact. I feel like this is a great segue into that. So when you're writing about real people, there are 3 things that you should take into account. Consent, for one, so like release forms and stuff like that. Respect, so no derogatory stuff about said people, and then the boundaries, right? Do you have any comment regarding ethics in
Sure.
nonfiction?
I had a couple different things happen in since I do a podcast as well as I bring artists on. For me, ethics are important, and sometimes I mess up and I hear about it later. I don't think that it's a big deal to mention somebody's name or something like that. And it's like, how do you know that? I'm like, I don't know. So it might not even be something that's personal. I've had it happen where I mention, I don't know if it's a mention. I may have used, what the heck was it? Oh, I had this old photo, or not a photo, but a picture of a painting of some sort. And it was just an etching. And I just put that on a page. And I had someone write and say, that's a copyrighted thing from this person. And I was like, oh my goodness. It's obvious that you should think.
Yeah,
Obvious.
you can't just yank art.
And I was like,
Yeah.
what the hell was I thinking? And yet, I did that. Luckily, it was on my website. It wasn't in a book. But I didn't even think about it, right? I didn't even think about it on my website. And so I took that one off. And then from then on, I made sure that I put as much copyright information that I could find if I couldn't get in touch with the artist. And when you're doing podcasts and stuff like that, you move fast, and sometimes you're not getting the information that you need. So you have to make sure that you cover yourself in the education. This is for educational purpose only, for anything that you're using with that, as long as you are representing the person, the copyright, all of that, the photographer, if it's there, whatever it might be. If you can't get the permission, you have to cover yourself with all of that. So ethics are important, and I can say that I have fucked up at it. So I know how important it is to make sure you don't do that. I've paraphrased friends. That's a thing that has happened, where I write something and I don't realize that I've just plagiarized something a friend said. Not out of their book or anything, but it's something that they said. And it's something that they said all the time. And all of a sudden, I just took it on myself. And boy, is that embarrassing. You sit there and you go, Jesus, that's right. Everything, so much of what happens in art is this amalgamation of stuff. But when you're dealing in nonfiction, you really have to watch, because everything that you're doing, it's not like a fiction piece. And even in fiction, you have to make sure that you watch yourself. You try not to be disparaging, like you said. With that said, it is astonishing how little ethics there are in, especially memoirs. Memoirs are essentially like people just say, go fuck yourself. Sue me later. See what happens. Killing off dead people. I read a couple recently that I was like going, man, you waited till that guy died, didn't you, to say that stuff? There are all these tell-all books, right? These tell-all books are not ethical. They are what they are, right? They're that person's recollection. But back on the idea of how much ethics matters, I had this woman reach out to me, won't say the name, won't talk about anything about the name of the book or anything, but it was an advanced copy. And she wanted me to read it and then have the writer, the author, on. And it was a memoir of her growing up, realizing that her dad was a serial killer in Australia. And I was like, holy shit, that's crazy. And I was like, let me read this. And nothing in that could be substantiated, right? Dad's dead. Everything's dead. It's out in the outback of Australia. Every page, I'm like, how can you justify how you've helped drag dead bodies and severed heads into piles. How can you be saying this to me? And why are you coming to Hellbent for Horror on this? How am I not reading about this in CNN? Why is the New York Times not paying for this story? What the fuck is this? And so I couldn't help but feel like, if this is true, this is the scariest damn thing to have to live with. And if it's not true, what the fuck is wrong with you? And it was just like, if this is, you're taking stuff from, like, I did some research before I even said no thanks, but no thanks. I was trying to find the areas. I was trying to find these cars that were missing, these people that were missing. I mean, there's no names and stuff like that. I'm like going, I don't see anything in this part of Australia where there's just all of this stuff happening. I'm looking at Google Earth. There should be this pile of cars somewhere. All of this stuff. I was obsessed with someone else's lack of ethics. And so I had to say, no, go with God. But I can't, if I get her on, I'm going to ask her right out if she's lying. It's going to be a very, very short thing, because I don't want to have this, especially what if you are talking about real people and all of a sudden you're using your lack of ethics to be sensational about someone's actual death that you really had nothing to do with, but you've now incorporated that into your fucking life. You see that kind of thing happen every so often. That's very scary. You're going to be a little creative, right? You're going to be creative, but ethical stuff.
Sure.
I mean, I've had, even in fiction that I've written, I've lost friends early on writing because I wrote shit that, oh, well, that's not you. It's an amalgam. Go fuck yourself. It's an amalgam. I'll bet your fucking face off. I know what you're talking about. And that's sometimes the fallibility of the author.
Yeah. Yeah. Balancing personal truth with people's privacy, which you mentioned. When to change names or composite characters is also a thing you mentioned. Writing with emotional honesty without exploiting trauma.
Right. Again, I'm not sure I can do that. I don't know if I do. I try. What I try to go at life, writing nonfiction like I'm at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? It's you don't use someone else's life. You change names. You become very vague about it. You are allegorical, and you don't shit in the room, right? You don't come in and say, my dad molested me. You instead say something like, I had problems at home. There's one person who needs to know about that other thing, right? But, I think that's how it goes. But the reality is that I try to be where I'm not dumping. It's not a therapy ground. Although for some people it is, right? I mean, there are different versions of nonfiction. Like you said, there's personal memoirs, there's biographies versus autobiographies. Those two can be very, very different. It's very, there's a couple punk rock books that are really good like this. I've read a lot of punk rock books over the last couple of years, and there's two about Black Flag, the early days of Black Flag, and the actual entire career of Black Flag. One is by, damn it, I shouldn't have brought this up and not have it right on the tip of my tongue. But one is by their first singer, who's also the singer of the Circle Jerks, and I can't believe it, Keith Morris. One is by Keith Morris, and the other is by a biographer who is looking at SST Records, which was the label, Solid State Technologies Records, that started the whole indie rock thing for punk rock. That was started by Greg Ginn, the artist and guitarist and creator of Black Flag. Same incidences are talked about in both of those books, two completely different points of view, because one was taking other people's view of the guy, and the other was directly from Keith Morris and how he painted himself and how he saw life and how he saw the other people in the thing. Very, very illuminating to find two books that are about the same subject. So that's the kind of thing where it's like, you want to be as truthful as possible. There is the thing of when we're talking about trauma, I try to keep it in a general fashion. In other words, nobody wants to hear that stuff. I know when it's weird because you have to kind of experience to know where the line is. You can't just say, oh, don't bring your trauma into it, because at certain points, there's certain things that you want to bring in. There's stuff in Kayla Janice's House of Psychotic Women that for many people, you'd say that's oversharing. But it makes so much sense for her and the way that she talks about these movies that obsessed her because they talked to her trauma without knowing it, which in a way means that our trauma can also be universal, not exclusive, which means we can still be helped. If it's just something that only happened to you and never happened to anybody else, no one can ever understand. But the idea that our trauma can be universal, that it may not be exactly the same, but there are things that are similar enough that art can actually imitate parts of our trauma or inform parts of our trauma or remind us of our trauma or help us move through it, tells me that there are multitudes of people who have had to go through the same pain. And if they can get through it, you can get through it. So that's kind of where she goes with House of Psychotic Women. So her oversharing isn't bad. But at the same point, if I was to do it, people might be a little bit more like, that's kind of, did I really need to know that about your dad? Did I really need to know? So I'm very, very general. I share in a general manner around certain things. I will talk about it to a certain degree to where it makes sense. I want to not make the book uncomfortable, and I don't want to make it where everyone can't somehow understand what's going on. If we go too deep into our own personal trauma, we make it all about us. And then it's like, who's your reader? The question you have to ask yourself all the time is, you have to be the reader going, why the fuck am I reading this? Why am I reading this? What is this being? Why am I reading this page? Okay, great, fine. What about this page? Why is it taking you so long to get to your point, right? I write better than I talk. And so I realize that you have to get to the point a little bit quicker. What is your point? Can you remember your point? How big is your arc before you circle back to what your point is? So when we talk about inducing trauma or using our trauma, I think we can, but we have to share in a general manner. We don't share other people's traumas, especially without permission. And we try not to use real names unless we want to get into fucking trouble, right? Yeah, so I guess that's where I would go. I would give another example, but I want everybody else to talk.
Hey,
I'm not even
Moon,
sure
are
I'm
you
still on the
there?
show, to be honest.
You are. You
See,
are.
The internet here has been trash, and I have been able to follow along the entire show, but it's been shaky. I think I have the same facial expression for like the last 20 minutes.
Well, that's about the expression that you should have looking at me. I mean, it's just like no barely there, somewhat somnambulistic.
Remember, sir, you are known as Scott with the good hair in my household. That's the name my wife gave you. You're Scott with the good hair. So,
all right,
I am the husband with. I'm the husband with no hair. That's where.
Oh my God! Good gravy. Okay, moving on.
That's the reason I wear a hat on every episode.
We are quickly approaching the hour.
Yeah.
So we'd probably wrap up.
I hope you got something out of this. I really
Absolutely. So quick recap. We talked about nonfiction. Choose something meaningful. Research deeply. Write clearly and ethically. And keep it engaging. Like fiction, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a book I would recommend if you want to see really taking some risks and yet still working in the ethics side. It's a book called Murderland by Caroline Fraser. So Murderland is an amazing book because it takes memoir, it takes fact, and it takes speculative fiction almost and science, and puts them together into a story about why is the Pacific Northwest a haven for serial killers. And it essentially talks about this girl who grew up very close to the place that Ted Bundy grew up in Tacoma, Washington. Now, Tacoma, Washington is like the central space that goes through a line through Washington and Oregon. That is where all these lead smelters were in the 60s and 70s, and how lead in bodies causes insanity and other health problems, and how this whole thing might be coming from that. And she takes her own personal experience with her father, the structure of how her house was, the turmoil that was happening, and turns them into chapters about the BTK killer, Ted Bundy, and a whole bunch of other people that are involved in it. And it's truly engrossing. She takes fact, she takes historical background, she takes her own personal experience and weaves that together, and she's very accusatory. She doesn't, I'm surprised she's not getting sued, because she's going right out. You guys knew that lead was poisoning people. You knew that the factories were doing this. You know that it causes these things. You didn't give a fuck. And here's the people who didn't give a fuck. And here we are again. Once again, the EPA getting knocked down. You want more serial killers? Here's how you get more serial killers. Keep doing this shit. And so I was like, wow, that is some bold stuff. And yet, it's so engaging. And in the end, what I really like about the book is that there is so much fucking killing that it no longer allows people who read true crime getting that little thrill of hearing about the murders and stuff like that. There are so many murders that by the end you feel like you've read a report about Vietnam or something. There are so many deaths that there's no romance, there's no thrill, there's no tawdriness. It's sadness. You're hit with a great sorrow for all the deaths that happen in that book. And it's an amazing book. And I give it high marks. And it's one that I think really takes risks. Since I mentioned Kayla Janice's House of Psychotic Women, that's another one. It's one that is similar to House of Psychotic Women. It really plays this tightrope work of being memoir versus factual document versus historical document and a true crime story. So highly recommended.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So, yes, we talked about nonfiction. We just got a couple of wonderful suggestions as to what to read next. And so Monday we might watch some true crime or a documentary or something. What do you think, Moon?
Who knows? I don't know.
Who knows? We'll talk about it off the air. It'll be fun.
Amazing.
The thing is that we are so locked into our convention next weekend.
We really are.
All my planning has been focusing there.
Good luck on that, by the way. I wish I was there, but unfortunately I'm moving to Olympia, Washington, where all the serial killers are, right next to Tacoma, and which is why I read the book. Quite honestly, I'm that kind of person.
Oh,
but I would have liked to have been there, but unfortunately, I'm in the process of moving right now, and it's a pain in the balls.
Okay, so next week,
you will be missed, though.
You will be missed. So next week we will be on Saturday, not Friday, but Saturday, we will be podcasting straight from the con, and we'll talk about what the heck we're doing there and whatever cool stuff we have experienced. I mostly hang out.
Saturday show. Okay, hold on.
No, go for it.
The cool thing about the Saturday show for us is that part of the con will have already taken place. So it will be a mix of what has happened and what will happen. And I think that's a really good perspective when talking about any sort of convention or gathering of creative minds, because I mean, who knows, with all those creative people, we may not be the only ones on the show.
Fingers crossed.
We may not. Fingers crossed.
Thanks for sticking it out to the end, guys. If you like this podcast, please rate us or like us or follow or subscribe or whatever. You can contact us at Sako in the Moon podcast at gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, S.A. Bradley. We super appreciate your 2 cents regarding the topic. And we hope to see you again in the future. That would be super keen. And we'll see everybody next week.
So long.
So long. Bye, everybody. Bye.